Today, we're zeroing in on something you hear about, well, all the time, your carbon footprint. You sent over a couple of really interesting sources.
Yeah, that was quite a conversation.
And also some, more straightforward material defining what this carbon footprint thing actually is and giving some ideas, some practical steps.
And what really jumped out at me from that podcast dialogue was the sheer range of opinions.
Right.
You had people just dismissing climate change as mumbo jumbo.
Yeah, I remember that phrase.
And then on the other hand, a really strong call for drastic changes.
Mm-hmm.
It really captures how divided people can be on this.
Exactly. And that's pretty much what we want to unpack today. We're not trying to relitigate the climate debate itself.
Wow.
Our goal is more to get under the hood of this specific idea, the carbon footprint. What does it actually mean? Where does it come from in our, day-to-day lives?
And moving beyond just saying go green to finding some actual concrete things you can do, specific actions.
Yeah, practical stuff. So let's start right there. The basics. What is a carbon footprint?
Well, the podcast used a nice analogy, I thought. A footprint, like the mark you leave on sand. It's the trace you leave behind.
Okay, I get that. Simple visual. And they linked carbon specifically to CO2, right? Like car exhaust.
Exactly. That visible plume, well, often invisible, but the emissions from burning fuel. But the other text we looked at gives a broader picture.
Okay.
It defines it as the total amount of carbon dioxide, CO2, and other greenhouse gases produced by our activities.
So it's not just carbon dioxide.
No, that's key. It includes things like methane, which you get from, say, agricultural landfills, and nitrous oxide from some industrial stuff. They all trap heat.
Right. And that heat trapping effect is the core issue, isn't it? These gases build up, warm the planet, climate change.
Precisely. And the text mentioned aiming for a low carbon footprint, which is good, versus having a very high carbon footprint, which, well, isn't.
Makes sense. So where do these emissions actually come from? Let's trace it back. The text broke it down into categories. Transportation was first, right?
Yeah, that's often the most obvious one for people, how we get from A to B.
Cars, buses, trains.
And especially airplanes. Both sources really hammered home the big impact of flying.
Yeah, those long-haul flights. It does make you think twice. Apparently, just one big flight can sometimes equal months of your other emissions. Puts it in perspective.
It really does. And the text naturally contrasts that with lower impact ways like walking, cycling, using public transport.
And carpooling came up too, didn't it? And maybe thinking about more efficient cars or electric ones down the line.
Yes, exactly. Those are the kinds of shifts in transportation habits it points towards.
Okay, so transportation. Then there's energy use in our homes.
Right. Electricity for lights, all the gadgets, appliances, and heating, cooling. It's easy to forget that flicking a switch has an impact.
Because a lot of that electricity still comes from burning fossil fuels like coal or natural gas.
Exactly. Burning those releases CO2. So the source of your electricity really matters. If your grid uses a lot of coal, your impact per kilowatt hour is higher than if it uses more renewables.
So the advice there is pretty straightforward, like turn off lights, use energy-saving appliances.
Yeah, the simple stuff. And maybe looking into renewable options like solar, if that's actually, feasible for you.
Right. Okay, what's next? Food. That one might surprise some people.
It can, yeah. Food production and agriculture. The text really highlighted meat production, particularly beef.
Why beef specifically?
Well, it takes a lot of land for grazing, for growing feed, a lot of water too. And then cows produce methane, which is a really potent greenhouse gas, especially in the short term.
Wow, okay. I didn't realize methane was that much stronger.
Yeah, molecule for molecule, it traps much more heat than CO2 initially.
Yeah.
Plus, you have the emissions from, transporting food all over the place.
So the suggestion is eat less meat, more plants.
Pretty much. More fruits, vegetables, trying to eat more locally grown food when you can, and also just wasting less food. Planning meals, using leftovers, that helps too.
Good point. Okay, last big category was waste.
Waste and pollution, yeah. Thinking about landfills, as all that stuff we throw away breaks down, it releases methane.
Ugh, landfills emitting greenhouse gases.
Yep. And then there's the energy used and the pollution created just to make all the things we buy. Plastic, paper, everything.
So that's where reduce, reuse, recycle comes in.
Exactly. That's the core idea. Plus, composting food scraps and yard waste, keeping it out of the landfill.
Right. Which brings us back to those different viewpoints in the podcast dialogue. The mumbo jumbo versus the drastic changes.
Yeah, it's worth remembering what mumbo jumbo implied there, basically. Nonsense, something not real, a total dismissal.
And then you had the person living out in the boonies, as they put it.
Right, the rural perspective. They brought up some really valid practical points.
Like suggesting walking or biking isn't realistic when everything's miles away.
Exactly. Or the sheer cost of trying to refit upgrade an old house to be super energy efficient. It can be hugely expensive.
It really shows that solutions aren't always one size fits all, does it?
Definitely not. What works in a city is different from the countryside. But interestingly, even in that same conversation, the idea of sustainability came up.
Ah, yes, sustainability. Using resources responsibly.
Using them so they don't run out, basically. Thinking about the future. That idea of having just one Earth really stuck with me. It applies everywhere, regardless of whether you're in the city or the boonies.
True. So keeping those different situations in mind, let's talk practical steps again. How do we actually do something?
Right. Moving from the problem to the, potential solutions. The YouTube chat got quite specific here.
It did, like carpooling. Both sources mentioned that.
Yeah, a simple practical thing. And the text added choosing public transport, biking, or walking more often.
And the electric or hybrid cars came up again, but with that caveat about the cost, which is still a big factor for a lot of people.
A very real barrier, for sure.
Okay, what about at home? Energy stuff.
Energy-saving light bulbs were mentioned in both. Easy win.
Yeah, seems simple enough.
The text added things like just remembering to turn off lights you're not using, unplugging chargers and devices, phantom load.
Mm-hmm.
They still draw power sometimes.
Oh, right, vampire power.
Okay.
And solar panels got a mention.
Yes. As a bigger investment, obviously, but for generating your own clean energy. And rain barrels came up too, which I thought was interesting.
Rain barrels. How does that help the carbon footprint?
Well, collecting rainwater for your garden means you use less treated tap water, and treating and pumping water uses energy. So it's an indirect saving.
Ah, okay. Makes sense. Then waste reduction. The 3 R's again.
Reduce, reuse, recycle. Absolutely central. The dialogue gave examples like using your own shopping bags, water bottles.
Avoiding disposable coffee cups and cutlery.
Yeah, all those single-use items. And composting food scraps came up again. Reducing landfill waste. Making fertilizer. They even mentioned capturing methane from larger compost operations in Brazil for energy.
Wow. Okay. And diet.
The text was quite clear. Aiming to eat less meat, especially beef, focusing more on plant-based foods, and trying to get local produce.
Right. So why does all this actually matter? Why should we bother trying to reduce this footprint?
Well, the text connects these individual actions back to the big picture slowing down climate change, trying to lessen the impacts like rising sea levels, extreme weather, damage to ecosystems.
And it's not just about the planet in some abstract way, right? There are other benefits.
Definitely. Things like better air quality in our cities from less pollution, which is good for public health, and honestly, often just saving money by using less energy or buying less stuff.
That's a good point, too. Cost savings.
Absolutely. And the core message really is that while one person switching light bulbs might seem tiny,
Yeah, feels like a drop in the ocean sometimes.
when lots of people make these kinds of changes, the combined effect really can be significant. It adds up. It can shift norms and even influence bigger systems.
Okay. Before we finish, maybe we should quickly touch on some of that vocabulary again from the podcast review part, just to make sure it's clear.
Good idea. So, mumbo jumbo, nonsense, dismissive term.
Right. Heat up just means getting hotter, like the earth warming.
Preserve, to protect, keep safe, like preserving the planet.
Boonies, that means a remote rural area.
Yeah. Sustainability, the big one.
Yeah.
Using resources so they last, maintaining things for the future.
Drastic, meaning severe or extreme, like drastic changes needed.
Feasible, whether something is practical or possible to do, like whether EVs are affordable.
Reef, modifying something like making an old house energy efficient.
Resource, a source of supply or wealth, like Earth's natural resources.
And carpool, just sharing a car ride. Simple.
Exactly.
So wrapping this all up then, our carbon footprint is basically a measure of our personal impact through greenhouse gases.
Yeah, coming from how we travel, power our homes, what we eat, what we throw away, lots of things.
But the good news, I guess, is that there are quite a few different ways, big and small, to try and reduce that impact.
And the key thing to remember, I think, is that collective action matters. Small changes done by many really do add up.
So maybe a final thought for you, the listener. Thinking about everything we've discussed, the different views, the practical challenges. What's maybe one change, just one, that feels genuinely feasible for you to try and incorporate into your routine starting now to lessen your impact?
And perhaps, what do you think the biggest hurdle might be in actually making that change stick?
Something to think about. Thanks for joining us on the Deep Dive.